Supp is an innovative Australian vitamin and supplement company rethinking the health industry. Whether you need support for collagen boosting, PMS, gut health, or energy and focus, Supp has you covered. You can pop, mix, or shot this range with a variety of tablet, powders, and delicious shots. Supp has been created closely with Australia's leading naturopaths and chemists, designed for young people to help them get more out of life. They are just simple, targeted supplements that meet your ultra-high standards. Thank you to Supp for being a podcast brand partner on Things You Can't Unhear. Well, hello everyone. I'm Maritza Barone and welcome to my podcast, Things You Can't Unhear. As a presenter with a focus on wellness, I have interviewed many health professionals in my time and heard stories that have opened my eyes about the world we live in today. But I found the best bits that I take home with me and the things I heard that have changed my life are usually when the recording shuts off and we can talk in length behind the scenes. And that's the information that I want to share with you on this podcast. A couple of days ago, I stumbled across today's guest via a podcast I listened to. It was called Decoding Purpose by Rebecca Tapp. And as I was listening to her interview, the guest she had on, I was so inspired to find out more about who she was because she was unlocking information on how to really understand what living our purpose means. And not only from a personal perspective, but from a professional one and on a grand scale. Now, the word purpose has really begun to be thrown around a lot lately. And it's wonderful that so many of us are now starting to ask ourselves questions and allow ourselves space to bring real meaning into our lives. And when we feel we are living our purpose, there tends to be a flow-on effect for the people around us. So let's get deeper into it. Welcome, Rebecca Tapp, to Things You Can't Unhear.
Hi, Maritza. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Now, just to give our listeners a bit of background, Rebecca is a speaker and optimism director at Future Crunch, which is a global movement of experts that believe science and technology are creating a world that is more peaceful, transparent, and abundant, designed to make people think differently. Rebecca is also the founder of One Dream United, supporting leaders and organizations to identify a purpose-driven business strategy. And as you know, Rebecca is also the host of the Decoding Purpose podcast. Now, you're certainly an interesting woman, Rebecca. No wonder I was intrigued to find out more about you. I love your title, Optimism Director. It doesn't get much better than that as a job title, does it?
No, look, I absolutely love my job title as well. And, it's one of those things at Future Crunch, we very much believe in what we call intelligent optimism. So it's not just optimism that's kind of the light, fluffy unicorn type of optimism. It's actually looking at the facts and looking at some of the incredible things happening in the world of technology and science and medicine that prove that the world is much better than what the news at this point in time might believe you to think. So it's certainly an honor to be the optimism director at Future Crunch.
That is such an important message because we turn on our radios, we turn on our TVs, and every day we are absolutely flooded with negativity. And I've just gone at almost a year now without watching the news. And I turn it on every now and then to check if I'm missing anything. And I'm really not. It's just completely flooded with negativity. And it's a flow-on effect into our day and into our lives, being surrounded by hearing this stuff of, war and death and violence and all of the stuff that is not necessary for us to hear on a daily basis. And if we are hearing positivity from, cures and different things happening in technologies that are great for us, then of course, what's going to happen in our lives? It's a total flow-on effect.
Yeah, well, look, our mission at Future Crunch is basically the idea that if we want to change the story of the human race, then we need to change the story we tell ourselves. And the way we like to assist people to do that is via what we call the information diet. We've come into an age because of digitization where there's, an abundance of information available to us. And so the idea of the information diet is that information is a little bit like food. You've got your greens, you've got your salads, you've got your fruits, you've got all of the healthier options, and then you've got, your pies and your cake and your ice cream. And it's up to us to choose what we want to consume and how we want to digest it. And we've come into an age where information is exactly the same, and we need to be making more conscious decisions around how we take in and ingest healthier information.
Absolutely. It's incredibly important. Now, how do we, I know you have your podcast, Decoding Purpose, and I want to talk about purpose in depth with you because as I said, it's being thrown around a lot more lately, which is great. But how do we even begin to describe, or as you call it, decode what purpose is? I've heard many variations of this and I'd love to hear your take on it.
Fantastic, because it's like my favorite subject.
Yeah.
Look, I think purpose by definition, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's the reason why something exists. Now, I think the definition itself is quite simple, but the explanation is a little more complex because I believe, in my experience and in talking in lots of different guests on the podcast and just people in general, that purpose is actually a deeply personal experience and it's influenced by the context of our lives. So therefore, it is something that is going to be explained and experienced in quite a unique way by each and every person who makes the decision to connect with their purpose.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, there are also different levels of purpose. And I think one of the myths from my perspective is the concept that purpose starts with why. Now, I love the work of Simon Sinek. So, I'm not discrediting any of that work, but I do believe that starting with why can leave people a little bit confused with regards to purpose. And my reason for that is, firstly, if we think about when we ask why, we are often asking why with regards to the past, like why did I act in a certain way, or why did I do this, or why did I do that, where purpose is something that I believe is experienced in the present moment, and it's an energy in motion, and it's also something that propels us into the future. So if we're asking why, we're actually often looking to the past rather than the future. And the other component to that, I believe, is that when we ask why we do something, we often come up with like 1,001 answers, all of which are quite valid. It might be that we do go to work to earn money, to pay the bills or put food on the table. There could be a zillion reasons. What I've found in terms of assisting people with the starting point, what I have found is that it's far easier often to be able to start with what. What is your value in the world? What do you do? How do you contribute to another human being, whether that be personally within your community or at work? And if you can get clarity around what you do, you can then start to dig into the why that sits underneath that. And I've also found that why can often be come from quite a vulnerable space when we start to get really honest about why we do what we do. But in terms of a starting point, I'd start with what, and I think that helps people to get clarity of purpose.
Yes, I was about to say to you, what questions should we be asking ourselves in order to start? So you've answered that beautifully. And I think just we're so busy in our general lives that we don't stop to create space and ask ourselves questions and go deeper. We're just running around and doing everyday things. And, if people with kids are rushing around like crazy, people with jobs, and it's just the busyness is taking us away from creating that space. And I think it's so important that we all just sit and create that space to ask ourselves those powerful questions. Now, on a personal level, I believe, like you do, each and every one of us has our unique purpose, our own meaning and our own reason. And like I just said, it seems so many of us spend a lot of our times not tapping into that or waiting for a life-defining moment or a wake-up call to do something about it. So what's your advice to people to, again, kickstart them, but also give themselves a meaning in life?
As a starting point, what I have found is purpose is often something that comes about as a result of a crisis or some kind of big wake-up call. And for those people, that's fantastic. If you've gone through something that's really asked you to break down the walls of identity, to break down all of the things that you think represented who you were, but maybe didn't actually allow you to step into your truth. Well, despite that being difficult, that's probably been a good experience in the long run. But in an ideal world, we don't want to have to go through a major crisis.
That's right.
In order to get clear on our purpose. As a starting point, I think often people don't allow themselves to find their purpose because they think it's selfish, or they think that it's ego driven, or they think, you know, they're consumed with fears, i.e. if I find my purpose, I won't be able to earn money, or I won't be able to do this, or I can't do this and I can't do that. And I think at the heart of that is we're so scared of stepping into our significance, of stepping into our true power, and of actually giving ourselves permission to be that person. And, you know, I understand why these things can be a little bit terrifying, because purpose is not necessarily the easier path. I believe it's the more fulfilling path. I believe it's the more soulful path. But purpose actually asks you to step into the greatest version of yourself, to step into a higher potential, to be seen, to be heard, to have a voice. And I think in some parts, sometimes people don't allow themselves to do that because they're scared, and because they're caught up in the ego side of the equation, rather than really shifting that ego into what I call significance. And just to clarify the difference between the two, ego very much has a focus on self-importance, where significance and finding your significance and stepping into that is actually far more focused on how your life matters to other people. So it's about being important versus self-importance.
So powerful. Now, having purpose in your personal life is one thing, but you go beyond that in your work to create purpose for leaders and corporations, to identify purpose-driven business strategies. Tell me about that. Do you believe people in high positions have a responsibility to do their part and lead with purpose?
Look, it's not so much about responsibility. When we're talking about purpose at an organizational level, we have actually entered an age that is being coined by some thought leaders as the purpose economy. So within the purpose economy, we have the perfect storm of a generation, being the millennials, who are coming through. They're the biggest generation since the baby boomers, and they are the most purpose-driven generation. So with that, you've got a really big generational group who not only in the jobs they are applying for are they looking for purpose, but in the products that they consume, they're also looking for purpose-driven companies. Alongside that, we've also entered the age of digitization. And what that means is there is a much higher level of accountability in terms of what we expect from companies, because we are so much more aware of the problems in the world. You know, where once upon a time we might not have been aware of what was happening in Syria, as an example, or, you know, different natural disasters or different humanitarian crises that are occurring internationally or within the country, where these days, because of digitization, we know what's going on. And I think people really want to be a part of the change. I really believe in humanity. And I think because of digitization, people are really wanting to, you know, be able to spend in ways where they feel like they're making a difference in the world at the same time. And look, the third trend, I think, is just around sustainability. There are things happening environmentally that we simply can't ignore anymore. So I think those three trends are really driving what is known as the purpose economy. So I wouldn't say it's a responsibility for leaders. I think it's actually one of the biggest business opportunities to arrive in a long time. And the organisations that want to get on that wave and surf that wave will be the organisations that succeed today and into the future. It's really important to clarify is that there are actually different levels of purpose. Now, purpose is about charity and it is about social impact. And that's one piece of the pie. But I actually think there are 4 different levels to purpose. Now, when we look at that, the first level that we can discuss is what I call integrated purpose. Now, this is personal purpose. And the best way I can describe this to you would be, have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs was developed in 1943. And basically it's a pyramid structure that states that we, as humans, we need to be able to, for example, meet our physiological needs, meet our safety needs, like, food and shelter and those sorts of things, meet needs with regards to belonging and love, self-esteem, just to name a few. Now, at the top of that pyramid, what we have what's called self-actualization. And this is the human desire to reach our potential. The way Maslow coined that is, what a man can be, he must be. If he was to write that these days, I'm sure he'd say, what a woman, can be, she must be also. So this is the idea that as humans, we have a core need to step into a greater impact, to step into a higher potential. Now, just before he died, he also added another level to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is self-transcendence. And this is the idea that once we have stepped into our own potential, we then are able to focus on another. And that is also a part of what we need to be happy and fulfilled human beings. And so I think this really beautifully sums up what it is to have integrated purpose. And integrated purpose is that internal experience of having clarity of purpose and of experiencing the energy of purpose in our everyday life. Now, for some people, they might find that, of course, working with charity. But I think one of the myths within a conversation about purpose is that it is just about charity. And actually, I believe that purpose is far more about how we inspire, influence, or create transformations for another human being. And so that could be something as simple as, my purpose is to help spread joy in another human being's life. And so, it could be, my purpose is to be the best parent I can be. Like, there's lots of different ways that our purpose manifests. And so when we're looking at this on an organizational level, we have to remember that at the heart of purpose is what it is to be human. And within an organization, for you to claim that you have any kind of organizational purpose or brand purpose, you need to understand the humans within that organization first. Because if you don't have clarity around the purpose of your people, then I don't believe that you can honestly claim to have any kind of brand purpose. So to take that a step further, once you have integrated purpose or personal purpose, you then have what I call interconnected purpose. And this is where you're able to, within your role, within what you do, identify how you are of service to another. And so this could extend from one person to another. It could extend from one team to another within an organization. It also could extend from one brand to another. And to give you an example of that, if we look at some of the most amazing collaborations, one I recently came across was the collaboration between Adidas and Parley for the Oceans. Now, Parley for the Oceans work to basically get ocean plastic out of the sea, and Adidas has been working with them to make running shoes out of ocean plastic. So that's a really great example of purpose and profitable interconnected purpose.
There are companies out there that are dominating purpose-led strategies. Which ones stand out to you? I mean, I know there's Tesla, who's doing amazing things and completely purpose-led.
Yeah, Tesla is completely purpose-led. Look, I think you can't go past Patagonia. Tom's Shoes is another one as well, who were doing some incredible things. So look, there's lots of companies. I mean, Thank You Water is probably the best example here in Australia. And look, I think what's really exciting from my point of view is you've got the emergence of these incredible social enterprises, and some of those ideas actually start out quite small. And one of my best friends is the incredible Tom Dawkins, who is the founder of Start Some Good, who run a whole different range of crowdfunding. They run a crowdfunding platform for ideas to create social impact. So, whilst we're talking about some of these bigger purpose-driven companies, some of the ideas are quite small and simple ideas that Start Some Good facilitate in order to enable, your solopreneurs or your individuals or even teenagers with great ideas to change the world to take flight.
That's actually great, because sometimes, it can be overwhelming and the idea is too big and you just sort of let it go because you have no idea how to start or how you would execute it. So I think that's an amazing option to have out there. What was the name of it again for our listeners?
Start Some Good.
Excellent. Now, if a brand wanted to start on their purpose statement, what do you think are some questions they need to ask themselves? Because a purpose statement is different to a mission statement or a vision statement, isn't it?
Yeah, look, our purpose statement, as I said before, I believe that purpose needs to focus clearly on the human experience. So if we look at, your vision and values, they are very much focused around the organizational outlook, which is actually quite different to purpose. Purpose has a focus on how it actually makes a human being feel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the emotive side to it.
Exactly. So, you were talking about Tesla before. If you look at Tesla's purpose statement, what they say is Tesla continues to make products accessible and affordable to more and more people. So they're purely focusing on what the human experience of their product is, which is this accessibility and affordability. And then they also frame that they want to create a future we all want. Again, that is focused on the human experience, and that's what makes it what makes purpose unique from vision and values and mission.
Now, in your opinion, do you believe within an organisation, does a purpose statement need to keep evolving over time? Obviously, as new advancements and technologies come about.
Look, I think purpose is a force for evolution. And look, again, I want to come back to what I said before, is that you can't have organizational purpose without understanding the human beings inside of an organization. And, that takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes the intention of really getting to know your people, know the employees, know your clients, know the stakeholders. So, if you were looking to have a starting point with regards to your organizational purpose, the starting point is actually spending time with your people. And that is why I talk about purpose as being like human DNA. And that is exactly where I would start. So if you look at this idea of DNA, firstly, it's human, so is purpose. DNA provides us with a unique code, so it's a unique imprint that exists within all of us. It's inherited, DNA is inherited genetically. So if you think about purpose, it's very much influenced by culture, values, beliefs. So, there's lots of different components of purpose that we inherit. And it also exists beyond space and time. So like DNA, in the same way we pass on DNA to our children, purpose is passed on as our legacy. And it's something that very much lives beyond our existence, whether it be an existence in a business or an existence in a job. We leave a part of our purpose behind. So, I think when we're looking at purpose, that's exactly where I would start, is actually understanding that purpose is human and beginning to unlock the DNA of the people within your organization.
So you do talk about how it's linked to our DNA in a lot of your work. Do you believe we're all fated to live our purpose, or do you believe we have a choice whether we engage in living it?
Look, I believe that our purpose, like DNA, it exists within us, and it's a decision as to whether we choose to connect consciously with that purpose.
So you're obviously living your purpose right now. Can you confidently say that?
Absolutely. And to come back to your original question before, I am absolutely living my purpose, but it is definitely something that evolves.
Mm.
So, I think you can get very clear around the articulation of purpose, but you also need to be extremely open with regards to what life brings you, what the universe brings you, because people, proximity, place, all of these things will inform how we engage and connect with our purpose. In the same way, I spoke when we started about the information diet and being conscious of what information we take in, because all of these things influence how our body, in the case of food, digests food, or in the case of information, how our mind processes that information. Purpose is no different. We need to ensure that the things in our external world actually support our ability to connect consciously with our purpose, so that we can show up for that legacy in a really powerful way every day.
And you can have more than one purpose, right?
Absolutely, you can have more than one purpose.
Yeah.
Definitely. I have found for me personally that yes, my purpose is to decode purpose and to do that specifically for leaders. But the other part of that for me is around the power of optimism. And sharing stories of optimism, because that's the other thing about purpose. I think there's an assumption that purpose is always positive. And actually, purpose is just purpose. It would be fair to say that Hitler had a purpose. Was it good for the world? No. But was he on purpose? Yeah, he was. So I think it's really important in terms of my own purpose to say, yes, I'm all about helping people to better, identify, articulate and integrate purpose. However, it's very important for me that that is teamed with optimistic storytelling, because it's through optimism that we're able to create brighter futures, that we're able to create positive impact for other human beings, and, to experience our own purpose in a really positive and fulfilling way.
I love that you're living your life so consciously. What does living our purpose feel like to you? Physically.
Physically. I would liken purpose to life force. So, I'm quite a spiritual person. And so for me, I've always, studied the chakras, and I'm a big fan of meditation and yoga and all of that sort of thing. For others, their connection to the source might be nature, it might be science, it might be music, it might be creativity. But for me personally, I would describe purpose as that chi, as that life force that really comes through us and enables us to expand and open and to step into the limitless possibilities within our life. And in the same way, we can sometimes feel closed to that life force. If we're feeling a bit down or we're feeling a bit disconnected, we'll feel that kind of heaviness come over us, opposed to when we're in balance and we're feeling energized, and we'll feel that chi come through us. And that's when we get that sense of being in flow, which people often talk about. And I believe it is that energy in motion that is purpose.
And do you wake up motivated? Do you feel self-fueled with your motivation?
Look, I personally feel absolutely self-fueled, but in the same way, if you look at the spiritual path, in the same way, we come across things that might need healing, or we come across stories that we might need to let go of. Purpose is not necessarily an easy journey, because it's a journey of self-development. And if we look at this idea of stepping into the future, we are creating this vision for who we want to be. Or I think I was looking at one of your podcasts and you spoke about the future bio. As I was going through your podcasts. And the best way I can describe purpose to you is to give you, I'm going to share a little story with you. I was producing a podcast for a little while called Inside Influence by an incredible woman, a mentor and a friend called Julie Masters. And she interviewed a neuroscientist by the name of Bo Lotto. And Bo spoke specifically about what is called the equatorial zone. And in biology, the equatorial zone is the space in between. So it's kind of the space between, it's the edge of the forest or the space between the land and the sea, to give you an example. So the way I see the equatorial zone is if you've got a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, in between you've got the cocoon. Now we know this cocoon is this space of like magical transformation where we're quite literally letting go of everything that existed in the caterpillar, everything, in order to become the butterfly. But at the same time, whilst we're in this cocoon, we're so vulnerable. We can't see anything. We don't know we're becoming a butterfly yet. And it can literally feel like we're in the dark while the magic happens. And I do think purpose is a little bit like that, because when we're wanting to step into a higher potential, in order to do that, in order to go through the death of the old to bring in the new, we actually need to get real about what's not serving us anymore. And that might actually mean we need to process some difficult emotions, that we need to really look at our perspective of the world, our inner narrative, all of the things that are actually co-creating our life. So we need to get really honest about, well, what does the life I want look like, and who do I need to be to get there? Because that is such a big part of what purpose really is. And in that sense, it's a deeply powerful process for transformation. But yes, it definitely is something that fuels you and drives your motivation, but it's also something that asks you to do the work. Like, who do you really believe you can be in this world? And what is your dream? And can you live that? And what does that look like? How do I get there?
Oh, that all puts a big smile on my face, especially that caterpillar analogy. I think that's so beautiful, because that darkness does lead to light. And I think it's just beautiful. What do you think about future generations? I know we probably have had to, in our generations now, had to unlearn a lot of behaviours. Do you think future generations will be better at seeking their purpose more so than we have been?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting conversation. I liken it a little bit to technology. Like if you look at, generation Gen Z and millennials, they're all digital natives. So like picking up an iPhone or the internet, things like that, it's just completely second nature. And I think for that generation, purpose is a little bit like that. Like, so they're kind of like, well, of course you'd have a purpose. And of course you want to step into that and create meaning from your life. And as I said, that could be influenced simply by the fact that they've grown up in a digital landscape. So they have been much more aware of the problems in the world. They have basically seen the older generations maybe not find the level of fulfillment they were looking for in terms of chasing monetary goals and chasing money. And they're wanting to create a slightly different reality. And that is why they've had a much bigger focus on meaningful transactions and solving human problems. That said, I think that the older generations are also wanting purpose in the same way the older generations want to know how to use Facebook. So, I think it's really interesting. I do think purpose is driven by the younger generation, simply because they're not wanting to recreate what maybe didn't serve the older generations. But at the same time, I don't think it's just about the younger generations. I think, like, for example, my dad is 78 and just started a brand new website and business. And, that's about purpose. That's about having a reason to get up every day. That's about feeling significant.
I love seeing people live their dream and their purpose, no matter how old they are and no matter what they're doing. I think it's gorgeous.
Yeah, look, in all honesty, he has a pretty incredible story. So my dad was a very famous race caller, and some people might be into horse racing. I'm not particularly, other than I was born into a family of horse racing people. What's incredible about his story is he actually started at the age of 8, decided he wanted to be a race caller. and he would go around to all of his neighbors' houses and paint paddle pop sticks and like collect paddle pop sticks from them, take them home, paint them all different colors. And then he'd go out and he'd wait for it to rain. He'd go out to the local rainwater channel and throw all the paddle pop sticks in and practice race calling the paddle pop stick when he was 8 years old. So I think, I think my fascination for purpose kind of started there, because I was like, how did he know? Like, how did he know that he wanted to be a race caller? And, it's incredible, because he went on to being the main race caller at Randwick and Rose Hill, which are the main tracks up here in Sydney. He went on to have an OAM. He was on an Australia Post stamp, and at 78 has started his own podcast and horse racing website.
Well, good on him. I think it does come a lot easier to some people than to others, and I get a bit envious sometimes when I see people in their younger years really finding their purpose.
Yeah, look, that said, my dad, because again, I've often asked why. He also came from a very poor family. His mum was a single mum. He had to start working at like 13 to bring home money for food. And, and that's where I do believe sometimes purpose, even at that age, is a survival mechanism, and it does come out of crisis. And that for him, visualizing a dream of who he wanted to be was a place of solitude for him in a really difficult upbringing. So, you can kind of go, oh, well, how do some people find it so young and others don't? I actually think that's to do with context. It's to do with proximity. It's about how the world around us influences us and what we choose to do with that. And I think for him, life was hard at 8, so he created a dream and decided very quickly that he was going to become that.
It's beautiful. And I think, obviously you've had your dad to mentor you into learning and being inspired about purpose. But what's your personal journey to be so passionate about decoding purpose?
Yeah, well, look, my personal journey into purpose happened. There were probably a few separate touch points, and I have found in having thousands of conversations with people, there generally is a turning point or a key event. For me, that personally happened when I was 23, and I had a massive mental health breakdown, and at that particular time had memory recall and flashbacks of childhood sexual abuse that had occurred. And I think it's extraordinary how the mind of a child works that has dealt with that level of trauma, that I was able to block it out. But got to 23, had a massive breakdown over the following years, went through a journey of spending a lot of time with an incredible psychiatrist. I also ended up in hospital twice. And the best way I can describe that time in my life is that over that 10-year period, it was a little bit like the butterfly effect, which I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Yeah, I have. Yep.
So those flashbacks would come in ebbs and flows over that period of time. But the thing for me, if I look back at that time, what really happened on a very deep level is I had this decision around, was I going to choose life? Was I going to choose a different future for myself? And how was I going to let this experience define me? And it was incredibly hard, because at that time, being in a mental health ward in a hospital, it wasn't like today. Mental health is discussed today. You've got speakers in schools talking about depression and anxiety, and even with the recent Royal Commission, you've got people talking a lot more about sexual abuse. When I was in my early 20s, there was a lot of shame attached to these things. And it was very difficult being in hospital. I felt really isolated from my friends, and what actually happened was, it shattered my ego. I had to let go of all of those things that I thought kept me safe, and the identity that I thought was acceptable and cool. And I really had to go out to the edge. And there were times where I actually didn't want to live, but something inside me was like, you know what? Your life is important. You matter. You are going to do amazing things in this world. And it's not like I consciously knew that, but I think some part of me knew that I had a job to do on the planet, and that there was a reason I was here. And, you know, that is what purpose is. It's really getting clear, like there's a reason that I've been given this life. And it's kind of my obligation to work out what that reason is, because why else exist? And I think for me, when you go to the edge, not that I would want this for anybody, but when you go to the edge of, well, do I actually want to live? Do I want to do the work? Do I want to get through this? When you sit on that edge, something happens where you very quickly become aware of what purpose is really about. And look, don't get me wrong, that was a good 15-year journey since then. So I'm not saying it all happened in that moment, but that was probably the real catalyst for me in terms of feeling like I needed to step into a life where I really mattered, where my life mattered to other people, where I was significant, where I helped people and healed people.
There was an awakening moment and a definitive moment there for you. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I was only 23, so it was a long journey from that point forward. I'm not saying that that I would want anyone to go there, or that if that happens that you would have that level of clarity overnight, because there's a lot of healing that happened and a lot of work with the right therapists, and and I did a lot of chakra dance and healing therapies and all sorts of things to land where I am today. So and that comes back to what I was saying before, that purpose is a transformative process, and it requires that people do the work.
Yeah, there becomes a tipping point in people's lives when they begin to take action. And I say this a lot. I really want people not to have to hit rock bottom before they make a change. And listening to this podcast can easily be a tipping point for someone. They can just hear what you're saying and be inspired to make that change just by listening to this. It doesn't have to be a deep, dark, horrible occurrence in your life. You can actually grow just by choosing to grow. And I hope people can take that on board and spend that time and space asking themselves questions, and the deep questions, the meaningful questions about life and what makes them happy inside. And then hopefully we can all start to live our purpose.
Absolutely. And I guess to give some of your listeners a bit of a tool, I spoke earlier in the conversation about the DNA model.
Yes.
And to break that down further, the acronym for DNA when it comes to purpose is that purpose is a decision. So it's the idea that, like DNA, purpose exists within us, and we simply need to decide to make that connection. It's that simple. So, as you're saying, let this conversation, let this podcast, let this moment be that moment of clarity where you go, you know what? I choose to connect with how my life is significant for this planet at this point in time. Once you've made that decision, you then can go into what I call narrative, which is the N in the DNA. And narrative is simply looking at the power of storytelling. And if we look at storytelling, human beings, all of human life is an intricate web of human stories. And, if you're looking at crafting a story of purpose, and when I say a story, you're looking at the story you tell yourself about why you do what you do, but you're also looking at the story you tell the world. And to break down that further, if you're looking to gain clarity on what that story might be, have a think about, okay, well, what's true in my life? Again, if we look at DNA, my eyes are hazel, so I can't just go out there and say my eyes are blue. They're not blue. My DNA means I have hazel eyes. Make sure the story is credible. If you look to your past, you would have had a whole series of different experiences that would have been informing you around what your natural gifts are. What are your natural talents? Where have you achieved some level of mastery? Again, I can't say to you that my purpose is to play the most beautiful music on piano. Why? Because I've never actually played a piano in my entire life. So that just simply wouldn't be a credible story of purpose. What I can tell you is that I can credibly go out and have conversations about purpose because I've made it a point to master purpose in my life. And then finally, look to the future. So if you're looking at a purpose-driven story, purpose is a story of what's possible in the future. Looking back for example, on the Star Wars trilogy, there was a character by the name of Nichelle Nichols. And at one point she was wanting to leave the cast of the show, and Martin Luther King said to her, "You can't." And she's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Because you are the symbol of what's possible for the future." And as an actress of colour, he believed that she represented a future where people of colour would be respected within society. So that's a really great example of purpose as a story that captures what's possible tomorrow.
Oh, that is so beautiful. You are a very
Yeah.
fascinating woman, Rebecca. I'm privileged to have spoken to you on this podcast. What's next for you? What's coming up that we need to know about?
Well, look, I think, I think I would love everyone to obviously join me on the mission of decoding purpose. So whether that's, tuning into the podcast or simply jumping onto the website, I'll have a downloadable PDF there shortly, which is all about leadership in the new dawn of purpose. And I'm also speaking down in Melbourne on the 13th of September at the Spark the Change conference, which I can send you over the link to that as well.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, and then apart from that, just really working with the Future Crunch team. We've got some exciting projects coming up to be able to take stories of optimism out into the world via our newsletter, our website, and our keynote presentations.
Oh, that's beautiful. You keep doing all of your wonderful work. And everyone, you can listen to Rebecca, as she said, on her podcast, Decoding Purpose. You can hire her as a speaker for any of your upcoming gigs, and also work with her one-on-one if you want to get deeper into a personal or corporate purpose. Her website is RebeccaTapp with a double P.com. Thank you so much, Rebecca. You're intriguing and you're wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please share this episode to everyone. I think we can all take something powerful away from what Rebecca has shared today. And again, as I said, I'm privileged to have had her on the show. Be happy, be healthy, be conscious, and be kind.